speaking of conferences, what do you do when you have to exchange particulars or coordinates at a conference today? Well, my next guest has been working on such a solution. Here to talk about building a modern business card using Eleventy is USC's very own Bryon Tjanaka. Enjoy.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Bryon Tjanaka. I am a PhD student at the University of Southern California, and today I'm going to be talking about my project, Building a Modern Business Card with Eleventy. This title page includes a couple of links associated with my project, but I'll also include these links at the end and in the chat, and there'll also be a QR code at the end linking to the slides. So the story of my project begins when one day a student walked into my lab, and we talked about research, as we so often do, and at the end of the talk, the student asked me, "What's your email?" And so I started to spell out my email, like Bryon, and overall it started to become pretty frustrating because I would say a letter like N, and I would be like, "Oh no, it's not M, it's N as in Nancy." And so it quickly became clear that like there's got to be a better way to do this, because after all, we live in the modern era, and I shouldn't have to like go spell out my email when we already have stuff like the internet just lying around. And so this frustration led me to think, like, what are some ways that I can connect the physical and the virtual world together? So I looked around, and the first solution that came to mind was QR codes. QR codes are really ubiquitous. Every phone nowadays has a QR code reader, and you can easily just point at a link and you'll get to the web. So linking physical and virtual worlds. And so that led me to the first iteration of my project. Essentially, this is just a single card with a single QR code on it. And by scanning this QR code, you can easily get my email. And so this is great. Now, instead of having to spell out my email, I just point someone to this card and say, scan it, and we're good to go. So that's all fine and dandy, but then I began to get more ambitious. I figured, I don't just have an email, I have other contact info. Like I have a website, I have a GitHub, I have a Twitter. And so I decided to scale this card up. And that led me to my next iteration, which was to add more links. So in this iteration, I have 12 links, and now when somebody asks me, like, what's your website? And I'll say, scan this QR code. What's your GitHub? Scan that QR code. And that's really cool, but then, I've got to come up with more problems for myself to solve. So the next problem was that I wanted to carry this around to show off to my friends. Like I wanted to take it to my classes and say, here, scan my QR codes. And as such, this thing actually didn't like fit in my pocket or in my backpack. And as such, I wanted to shrink it down a bit. So that led me to the next iteration. It's sort of business card size, which means that it fits in my wallet. And I've also reduced the number of QR codes because you couldn't fit 12 QR codes on this single card. And this is, of course, like really nice. Now I can take it around to all of my classes, show it off to all my friends, and awesome. But there are also a couple of problems that arise with this new iteration. The first is in terms of, I'll call it the staticness problem. So for example, what if I print out 100 of these and then I said, okay, I want to change my email. Like today it's bryon@tjanaka.net, but maybe tomorrow I want it to be b@tjanaka.net because I want it to be a bit shorter. In that case, I would have to reprint the 100 cards, and it would be really a waste of resources. So that's one problem, the staticness. And the other problem that I came up with is when I try to take photos of it with my uh, iPhone camera, it's kind of hard to pick up the correct QR code. So, for instance, if I'm pointing at the website on my phone here, it might instead go to Twitter. And as a side note, I think this is actually fixed in recent versions of iOS, but at the time that I was doing this, it was not working as well as I would hope. So that's two problems. And in thinking of how to solve these problems, I looked to sort of these link collection sites, I guess you would call them. In particular, I thought of like Linktree. So if you look at something like Linktree, the what it does is it takes a single link and then it just has like a list of all of your other links. So for example, maybe I have linktree.com/Tjanaka, and on that page it'll have like my email, my uh, website, etc. And thus I began to think like what are ways that I can take something like Linktree and kind of build a physical manifestation of it. And that led me to my final iteration, which is this business card over here with one link to rule them all. So this is, in a nutshell, a physical manifestation of Linktree where we have one QR code, one link that links to a contact page with all of my info. So on the left here, you have that business card, and this pretty much solves both of my problems. So first, it solves the staticness problem because if I want to change my contact info, now I just change the website. It's really easy. And second, it solves the camera problem because now you only have to look at one of the links. So if you take your phone and you really can't miss that one link. Awesome. So before I talk about how I implemented all of this, I should mention that the idea of putting a QR code on a business card is certainly not new. People have been doing it for years. But I think that this project really is one of the few that kind of like brings the idea of having a link collection thing onto the business card. And of course, the implementation is unique in that it's done in Eleventy. Now, the reason I chose Eleventy for this project is for its flexibility. And in particular, I found Eleventy flexible in two ways. The first way is that with Eleventy, I can pretty easily include all of my existing tools. For instance, I like to use Tailwind for styling, Webpack for JavaScript. This project currently doesn't use JavaScript, but if I do in the future, I can easily add it in. And then there's also Markdown and Katek. And of course, I'm referring to the sort of pre-compiled version so that I don't have to ship any client-side JS. And Katek in particular is important to me because as a PhD student, I read a lot of math. So eventually my links may include math. The second way that Eleventy is flexible for me is that it can generate things that are not necessarily part of a traditional website. So for instance, I wanted to generate not just the contact page for my website, but also the entire business card pipeline. So in this transform here, I've generated the QR code from a single link. So I take the content, which is the link, and then I check if it's a QR code SVG, and if so, I'll return a QR code here using the QR code library from NPM. And what this means is that I can take the website, I can take the business card, and I can just generate everything together in a single project. And that is exactly what I've done with the code here on GitHub. And so essentially, this just takes all of the code, Netlify builds it, and then you can easily see both the contact page and all of the pages. So I'll go through those pages real quick. So so this is the main page. This is the where you have all the contact info. This is at contact.btjanaka.net. And on this page, you have like the website, LinkedIn, resume, etc. And of course, the link to tutorial at the end. And then there's a /QR as well. This is for when you run out of business cards to give out. So you just pull out your phone and say, scan this QR code instead. And finally, you have card.svg, which links in that QR code that I mentioned. And then you can just print this out. There's 2 copies of it. And then there is a tutorial on how to hold it up. So in terms of things for the future, I have 2 things that I want to fix. First is increasing the flexibility. Currently, the font size is a bit fixed. So if you have a name that's too long, it might overflow the card. And second, I'm thinking of having professional printing, where I don't just print it out on like 8.5 by 11 paper, even though that's accessible, it's kind of flimsy at times. So I might print it on cardstock in the future. And that's my talk. These are the links associated with it, along with the QR code for slides. And if you have questions, you know how to contact me.